At the start of a new week, we do like to hear from the Australian Christian Lobby, an update on the political agenda for the week ahead. Joshua Rowe is the ACL State Director for New South Wales and the ACT. Hey Joshua, welcome back to 2020.
Neil, thanks for having me. And wow, it sounds like there's just so much going on politically, and you've got a great program coming up today with all those speakers.
We're going to cover a lot of ground today, and for those who do like to know about those values that shape our global landscape, it'll be an interesting conversation ahead. But you know what? Your contribution's important too. But before we get into the politics and stuff like that, hey, a personal congratulations to you, Joshua, just back from a break and celebrating the birth of your new son. Give us the details on this new little, son of yours.
Thanks, Neil. Yeah, God has richly blessed us with a baby boy named Daniel Phillip. He was born on the 11th of May, and I was able to have a month off with him and my wife, just getting to know him and supporting her as she recovered. But wow, what a privilege it is to bring life into the world, and it really reminds you to thank the Lord and give him glory for the good gifts that he gives us, especially to have children and to pass on a legacy and to share with them the good news of Jesus. It's been a real learning curve for me as well, but so privileged to have brought him into the world and just really enjoyed this last month with him, yeah.
Fabulous. And so Daniel Phillip Rowe, he's a month old, and, for listeners, thrilled, no doubt, to know that you're there at the helm, the ACL State Director for New South Wales and the ACT, a young man with a very young family, and right there on the cutting edge of understanding the politics and what it is to be a Christian in amongst all of that. Hey, let's start with some of the issues. There's one recent development we'll start with, and I'll get your thoughts here. Where a school teacher at a Christian school who was in a same-sex relationship has been sacked by the school for not upholding the ethos of the school. What are your thoughts on that development in that story?
Well, I think that the media shouldn't be surprised, and people shouldn't be surprised when Christian schools uphold Christian values. I mean, it came out in the Sydney Morning Herald, and they were making a big song and dance about this story. But it was quite clear, written in the contract of that teacher, that they need to live a lifestyle that upholds the values and the ethos of the Christian faith, and to demonstrate a Christian lifestyle in all of their affairs, both inside and outside of the school. And so when you're then living publicly in a way that contradicts God's intention for marriage, you're going to have to expect appropriate disciplinary action from the school. And so my thoughts are that the school acted appropriately. The Sydney Morning Herald also published the letters of correspondence between the teacher and the principal. The principal was very professional about the way he approached it, very gracious, willing to have conversation about it, but being also very clear that in order to teach at this school, you have to uphold the tenets of the faith and to demonstrate those tenets to the students. And so to live willingly outside of that, would mean the termination of the contract as per the specifications in that contract. So I think it was appropriate, and we really need in Christian schooling, we need from the federal government and state governments protection to be able to do this, so that Christian schools can cultivate environments where students are able to learn and be educated with a Christian worldview.
Let's just pause and reflect for a moment here, Joshua, and I'll get your thoughts because, the word contract comes up an awful lot. And when a teacher signs a contract that they're going to be allowing the school to set the boundaries and to set the values and to set the faith standards, those things ought to be upheld. Otherwise, what's the use of having a contract at all? But there are contracts, and to relinquish the freedom to be able to set your own contracts, this is an issue in religious freedom, isn't it? What are your thoughts around that word contract?
Well, I think a contract is binding, and the importance of a contract is that, two parties willingly enter into it and agree to the terms of that contract. And the importance, again, for Christian schooling is that we're not only in Christian schooling about academia, although that's an important and integral part of the education. It's also about a demonstration of a Christ-like lifestyle to the students so that they know that they are called to reflect that form of living. And so Christian schools are very specific about these lifestyle clauses because it's by actually entering into being an educator in that school, you're not only agreeing in a contract to fulfill certain educational and academic requirements, but also to live in a way that respects the faith, not only respects and speaks about the faith, but demonstrates it actively through a transformed life. You know, the Christian worldview in the gospel is not just about proclamation; it's about demonstration. Christ shows that very clearly in his ministry, and he calls us to that in our living as well, not only to speak about what we believe in, but to actually demonstrate it through our actions. And so it's very, very important in a Christian school that contracts actually ensure that teachers are entering into an agreement that they will demonstrate and live out the gospel and the truth, not just speak about it.
Well, there are clauses in contracts, and we'd all appreciate that if you sign the contract, then you go along with the values and standards that you're signing up to. But of course, activists don't want Christian schools to set their own contracts, and that's really one of the issues around this religious freedom focus. Let's move on to another really significant thing that impacts on that, and that is in New South Wales, the Equality Bill, an omnibus bill that amends over 20 pieces of New South Wales legislation seeking to entrench LGBTQ plus ideology into New South Wales law. What's the latest on that Equality Bill, Josh?
Well, I appeared before a committee hearing on the Equality Bill on the 30th of April, so it was a few months ago now, and that committee hearing went over a couple of days. It really was not enough to dive into the depths of this bill, as you've just highlighted. Being an omnibus bill, that nature of legislation is just so complex, and it covered and spanned 10 different concerning issues, things like commercial surrogacy, religious freedom, parental rights, children's rights, vulnerable women. There was a lot of things that this bill was covering, and the ACL was able to go to that committee hearing and really spend time unpacking some of the concerns. Along with the committee hearing, though, a public survey was sent out to residents in New South Wales, and that showed a really interesting and important piece of information and development there, was that of the 14,000 respondents to that particular public survey, 85% of New South Wales residents opposed this bill in its entirety. And I'm not surprised by that at all, Neil, because it is a very ideological bill. It's a bill that sacrifices so many rights of different groups for this particular sexual minority. And so one of the things that we've been doing now is highlighting to the members of Parliament and to the media just how condemning the community sentiment is of this bill. If we really do live in a state where it's a representative democracy, then that should resound a very loud and clear no to this piece of legislation.
It seems to me that almost every one of the propositions in this legislation goes against where we would stand as Christians and have a different values base by which to judge what's right and wrong. I mean, things like the bill allowing people from the age of 16 to change their sex on their birth certificate whenever they want to. And, of course, bypassing the parental rights, the parent-child relationship, permitting a child under 16 to consent to medical treatment against the will of their parents. These sorts of things, they just run against the grain, but there's a chipping away that's going on. What are the other elements that you might have identified in that bill that Christians ought to be very concerned about, because it seems to be that this is, maybe close to getting voted on?
Yeah, well, another area of the legislation is related to the Surrogacy Act of 2010. It would decriminalise commercial surrogacy arrangements overseas. And what that allows people in New South Wales to do is exploit economically vulnerable women in foreign countries in order to use their reproductive system as a commodity to produce children, then ripping the child away from their biological mother. So we are always very, very clear about upholding the sanctity of life at the ACL, and that sanctity of life extends to not monetising women and their reproductive system, as well as children, and making them a commodity in that way. So it's something, another component of this bill that we've been very clear about. There is also a very strong religious freedom argument to make against this bill related to Christian schools. The legislation actually seeks to not allow principals or schools to be selective in their employment, and that extends all the way to if a teacher was actively participating in sex work. So it goes beyond just identity, it goes to occupation. If a Christian teacher was engaging in sex work outside of the school would not be able to take disciplinary action against that particular teacher under this legislation. So again, proposing a very grave threat to religious freedom and Christian schools and institutions' ability to be able to protect and create environments that uphold the character of the faith. So there's just so many different elements to this piece of legislation that, as you say, fly directly in the face of Christians. And we really need the community, the Christian community, to voice their concerns about this bill, because so often, even though they're very radical, I think it's as a result of fear, Neil. People don't speak out about it. It doesn't get out there in the media. And so people can't identify and see just how radical these pieces of legislation are, and then appropriately condemn them for that radical nature.
You know, the word radical even isn't an overstatement when you talk about this particular bill, because I guess if you ask Christians, and I've been in these conversations, and Christians can't believe that such things would be proposed in our Australian parliaments. This one in New South Wales. In fact, a comment from Sydney Anglicans that most politicians have little idea about the contents, let alone the consequences of this bill. So the ignorance of the public, but just picking up on what the Sydney Anglicans were saying, there's ignorance even within the Parliament. Is this what you pick up when you're circulating around those corridors of Parliament in New South Wales?
That's right. Now, I'm on record at the committee hearing saying exactly that as well. I said to the chair of the committee, I've walked around these halls, I've met with MPs who are not even aware of what's in this legislation. Omnibus bills have always been known historically to be undemocratic. The reason they're undemocratic is because they seek to package so much into one bill that people, MPs in Parliament, don't even want to engage with the minutiae of that law because it's so complex and convoluted and hard to understand. And so what often happens with these bills is little things get hidden in there. I mean, this piece of legislation, I would say, is the exception to that. I would say it's quite overt what's in it, but the MPs have to go and actually read through and engage with it and understand it. I'll pick up one more section, which is an amendment to the Summary Act of Offences, which seeks to remove Part 3 out of that particular act in New South Wales, which is the part that actually criminalises prostitution in public spaces in front of schools, churches, hospitals, open acts of sex, the solicitation of sex in your neighbourhood. Under this kind of amendment, you could have a brothel opening up next door to you within your neighbourhood. Yet MPs are so oblivious to these kind of changes and the impacts that it will have on the New South Wales community. They're often being so politically correct and trying to, negotiate and dance around not saying anything bad about a bill like this, but it really just does need to be condemned outright. And the residents of New South Wales in that survey, as I said, have made that loud and clear, with 85% of them just saying no way. New South Wales Parliament and the government really need to respond and actually listen to their constituency and say, you know what, we're putting this bill down and we're not going to pass anything from it. We're not going to debate it any longer. It's time to put it to bed.
And from what I understand, in the state of Queensland, they're already into that legislation around prostitution, but you're saying that's part of this bill, this equality bill in New South Wales, and certainly needs to be opposed. And you know what? Just talking about all this underscores the value of what you do, Josh, because if there is ignorance in the corridors of power in New South Wales, then it's people like you who bear a fairly significant burden on your shoulders to be able to let those politicians know before they vote on such a bill just what they might be voting for. So there's some encouragement there for you, Josh, but also encouragement for listeners to support the good work of the Australian Christian Lobby. Hey, there's something significant that's coming up. It's called the Chloe Cole Tour. Give us an insight into what Chloe Cole is all about. She's coming to Australia and she's a detransitioner. Give us an insight here into what's happened to her and what she's coming here for.
Thanks, Neil. Chloe Cole is an American girl. She, as you say, is a detransitioner. She's coming here to Australia to tell her story. Now, when Chloe was 13 years old, she developed a disorder where, though she was a biological girl, she believed she was a boy. And sadly, due to the health system in the United States, she was able and encouraged, in fact, to access pharmaceuticals that suppress the natural development of her puberty. And then later, at 15 years old, she actually had both her breasts removed in a double mastectomy. Now, Chloe, as she grew older and looked retrospectively on her life, realised that those interventions did a lot more harm than good for her. And in fact, she realised that what she needed was appropriate psychological and mental health help to be able to deal with some of the traumas in her life, as opposed to physical alterations to her body that would irreversibly damage her. Now, the great thing about Chloe is she's very courageous and brave. She's only 19 years old, but in America she goes around raising awareness, and now she's coming to Australia to raise awareness about what's popularly known as gender-affirming care and around the harms that causes to both children and adults. So she's going to New South Wales Parliament, federal parliament, parliaments in Brisbane and South Australia as well, to talk and speak to government officials to call for an inquiry into gender services in Australia to really undermine this form of intervention that's become so popular and has harmed so many children abroad, but domestically here in Australia as well. We also have Chloe Colson coming along, who's a detransitioner from Australia. We're in good contact with Mel Jeffries and Jay Langadinos, who are two other detransitioners in Australia here who have had their bodies harmed and mutilated, sadly, in this way, and now speaking out against this, calling for it to stop because of the grave damages it's doing to our community, to our families, to our children.
And of course, as Christians, we've understood now for a long time, and people have heard me say many a time, the reason why we might speak out here is because nobody's allowed to tell these young people the truth, including the doctors who are giving the advice that puts them through all of this harmful transition regime. Now, she's coming to Australia to build pressure on federal and state governments to conduct a public inquiry into gender-affirming care. You're hosting those events at the New South Wales Parliament and Federal Parliament. What's happening with those?
So the one in New South Wales Parliament will be hosted by the Honourable John Ruddock, who is a member of the upper house there and very outspoken against gender ideology. I will also be speaking at that event. That's more of a closed event for members as well as the federal parliament event. But for anyone who's listening who is around the ACT or who is in Canberra, we do have a public event on the 25th of June from 7 p.m. through till 8:30 p.m. Where Chloe and Courtney Colson will be both speaking that night. That's at Vision Church, 25th of June, 7 till 8:30 p.m. And for those listeners who do want to sign up to come to that event and to hear Chloe's story, you can use the web address www.acl acl.org.au and just toggle to the events page. It's up on the top bar where you can access all of the events that ACL hosts and you can sign up for a ticket there.
So that website, acl.org.au, and you'll find links there for not only the Chloe Cole tour, but how you can take some action around that equality bill that's going on in New South Wales. Joshua Rowe is the ACL State Director for New South Wales and the ACT. Joshua, thanks so much for another great update today on 2020.
It's always a pleasure to join you, Neil.